What's good, YouTube and Twitch? We're live to both with a bit of an interesting ban list conversation. I know, no sooner than is only 24 days away by the time this video goes up, 25 days away while we are streaming this, and we have so many cards to actually get through. First off, True Kings of all calamities. People were calling for it to get banned just last list, and now it's kind of the win condition of a deck that has popped up from Phantom Rage, which is Virtual World, the only upgoing value in all of Phantom Rage. So to actually steal one of its biggest win conditions would kind of set it back to what feels like the rogue category, relying on niche hand loops or trying to figure out and scramble for something else. And people have also pointed to there's another rank 9 that could replace calamities. You know, that Sylvan looking guy? It's not really that good. It's not a good replacement. So when it comes down to Virtual World, they need calamities. And now you have a group trying to save calamities in the game while everybody else is still like, nah, get that guy out, eject, he's the imposter. So they really want it out of the metagame, but I do feel like calamities as a stun card is one of the most powerful floodgate XCs of all times, and I do think it deserves a serious look, but man, Phantom Rage is hurting for value right now, and stealing the only upward moving mobility of value right now in Phantom Rage besides Zeus being played in multiple decks, that's a yikes from me. LP is in the conversation today. Interesting one from chat. They said, I feel like hurting LP would hurt a lot of lower end Dragon decks, and it wouldn't kill Dragon Link, so why ban it? I think when something is being used at the highest level of competitive play and being used much greater of a power by bigger decks, even though it can help smaller decks down there. First off, Dragon's one of the most powerful typings. Dragon, Spellcaster, Warrior, most powerful typings in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Long term. So I don't think they need that much help, but Dragon Link has been massively taking over for the most part until our last tournament we had, the LCS, which Konami's not going to recognize. They'll recognize the remote duels. Point being, this is something that grabs things for free out of the deck for the most part, puts them on field, allows you to link up and continue your plays, and usually what you're grabbing also gets a search for power cards. Think about all of that. So just because it helps the smaller decks compete, it helps the biggest decks compete even on a grander scale in terms of just blowing out the opponent and having searchability from the extra deck. When you get into Invoker and cards like that, searchability onto board from the extra deck, typically they have a much bigger cost for what they're doing, and we'll get into that later in the discussion. But there is another flip side to LP. Future decks do need him. Future decks could definitely use him that Konami plans to sell. The Armed Dragon thing, cover of a set, crazy looking card and thing for nostalgia. And Dragoonity is actually going to be pushed into the Ghost of the set, like Ghost from the Past set, all the way in March. Think about both of those together. Two very long-term upcoming products that probably could use LP. Very much so. So if you get rid of LP, you do hurt future product. That is in the conversation with Banlist with Konami Brain. So maybe LP will be able to dodge a ban list. Two cards I think should not dodge the ban list for sure, in my opinion. Smoke Grenade of the Thief, no reason for this should be banned. Straight up, not at one, banned. People are searching it out of the deck essentially and hand ripping, and that's not okay in Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And then Miscellaneous Source, especially when you put Call by the Grave to 1, you put a counter of this card to 1 and kept this at 3. It got its hollow upgrade. I think it can stay off the ban list, but I think it should get limited to 1. You still give dinosaurs a play, a search for this. You have 3 Fossil Digs, 3 Overraptor, but opening this plus Ovi becomes much harder and less consistent, but you still give them the chance for power plays. Now, the Synchro engine is still in the talk. If you're hurting other decks, you're bringing them down. This will resurface a lot. What do we hit? You have Halka Fibrax, which has a playmat coming out for Yu-Gi-Oh! Day, so it's unlikely to get hit. Isn't that nice? Link Ross was banned in the OCG, and is a huge extension play for the deck. And then Auroradon you can still make with Halka. You can just grab the Deskbot 001 and link up into this, and then you have Herald, and you have extension plays. It's a bit much. So the question is, where do you actually hit this engine between Dawn or Link Ross? I think we follow the OCG and do Link Ross, but the power plays that Dawn offers is still very big. Realistically, I'd like to cut off the snake at its head, but Konami has product coming out for it. Yee-haw! Anybody want to add on this? You all had the words to say earlier in the stream. We have open chat with us.
Well, I still think Halka Fibrax is the obvious hit, but I don't think you should hit any of the others. I think despite the mat, Halka Fibrax has to go.
Yeah, I'm pretty much of the same ideal, but I don't think it'll happen. Now, speaking of other decks getting less powerful, something taking over, Dogmatika has been performing very, very well. I feel like this feels like a fair deck, almost Shadow-like, which is why it's also somewhat of a fan favorite. You're sending things from the deck, you're locking yourself out of extra deck. It's almost played like a double engine with Invoke sometimes, or Shadow, so other things that work as engines kind of combined with it. When it comes to this card, and the Buster Lock, something that we can talk about later at the end, if we get to it. But when it comes to the Dogmatika engine, I don't feel like it deserves hits yet, but if you're leveling the playing field, this will take over. I don't know necessarily where to actually deal with it. Do you deal, like, everything's searchable thanks to Servant? Do you hit Servant already? I don't feel like Konami does that until they get a chance to reprint it. I feel like this is going to be long-lived for a while. I don't feel like it needs to be talked about getting hit, and I don't think things will be brought to their knees where the point that happens. Now, one enabler that is still on the ban list is Heavy Metal Foes Electromite. I don't think this should be banned. I think that they banned it prematurely as we headed towards Master Rule 5. It was only topping like 1 to 2 YCSs, and without Astrograph, it's not the powerhouse absurd thing that it was, and can even be a choke point for hand traps. And you have cards like Isolde in this meta, which, granted, you have to run a greater cost of bricks, and Warrior has been running on this card for a while to even exist. But I feel like when you're banning all sorts of cards, and you're leaving stuff like Elpie and Isolde out and hitting this unfairly where the tops don't deserve it, that's a bit weird to me. Definitely weird. I think it should be off the list. Now, Broad Bull has a great conversation. This card is too generic and makes Zoo the engine viable against anything making rank 4s. Go into this, you're able to detach, get Whiptail, go into Trident, use Trident to detach a material, you now have a Zoo in the graveyard, and you can start comboing a little with Zodiac. Also, you could just play Borbo and go into Zoo. So, being able to generically search, get Whiptail as a material, get things pitched. Also in Zoo, it's a much amazing starter because right now they're struggling. They're struggling to get things turn 1 to the graveyard and combo off. He would allow that immediately. Is it worth it? Are people still too hurt by Zodiac? You have kids in the game now that never played against Zoo, and then you have people in the game who remember it getting banned at Japanese shops and wishing it happened over here as well sooner. I think Trident to 2 is a much better, like, fair range for updating the deck, or I think Barrage could come back to multiple. I think that was overestimated, but they probably will not do either for us. Barrage would help things get to the graveyard too. Right now, it's very choked out. Broad the Bull is definitely using any 2/4s to go into it, does bring back Zoo the engine as a conversation rather than just the deck, and right now the deck is doing well for itself too. It doesn't need the most help, but I do think you could see a peel off of Mommy Trident to 2. I'm not biased, smile. Next up, I have a couple of peel-offs real quick, and then we'll get to general conversation. I think Harpour could peel off. Girsu was highly overestimated originally, has done nothing. I think the deck could definitely make a big comeback thanks to Rusty being off the list, and while you may call me a mad lad for that, the Eternal format is a lot of people's favorites at this point. I would kind of like to see the resource game Modern Orcust has with just one Harpour, and yeah, bring Called back to 3 on top of it, but I even without Called coming back to 3, I feel like seeing what one Harpour could do would be perfectly fine. Colossus, I feel like the argument that Corridor is the reason Colossus stays banned in the TCG is a terrible argument. At this point, I don't think it would be powerful enough. I think the OCG proves that. I would rather see Thunder as a niche rogue deck while he's a walking mistake on legs that self-protects. You now have triple tactics talent. Now have Droplet. You have so many different ways to deal with this dude at this point compared to what we had before that are viable within the metagame. Free him. Let him back. And finally, Emergency Teleport I think is way too insane of an enabler, and despite Mutants and Virtual Worlds both coming into our most recent core set, I think that E-Tele would have come off beforehand if Konami was going to unban it like Bardiche. So my thoughts aside, Bardiche came off early. Don't you think them knowing what's in the set, E-Tele would have bumped up early if they were going to make that move? Think with Konami brain more in these ban list discussions instead of like player brain or what you want for your deck. So whenever we're realistically talking ban list predictions and what we think will happen, I don't think E-Tele moves unless they do hit something like Calamities, and even then it stops the future development of the Psychic as a typing as a whole, and that's why it's been one of the most moved cards from 1 to 2 to 3 to 2 to 1 to 1 to 2 to 3. It keeps happening, so I think that's a bit crazy. Now, some people seem to have some words. Where do you want to go back to in the conversation?
Well, going back to Broad Bull, I don't think that there's any chance it comes back at all. It is too generic because it can go into more than just Zodiac things. I mentioned before off video that you can do things like searching the Zodiac Black Sheep, I believe it's called, and do fusion plays with that.
Do you mean Ram or?
No, the Lunalite Black Sheep.
Oh, Lunalite. Yes, fusion sub, the old combos.
Yeah, there's still plenty of things that you can do with things like that, and do some actually kind of insane plays. And then all these fusion decks, you know, take Fluffles, for example. I know they're not a meta deck, but they're a good deck. And they would suddenly be able to make the Broad Bull search out their polymerization, hit with a 0 attack, and then go into Zeus main phase 2 if they don't get the kill. And now they're just free to play, and it actually would make them pretty nutty.
Yeah, I think it's a very powerful card too, and I think Zeus should probably stay a deck as well. Let's talk real quick. I said we would get to it. The Buster lock, should this be hit? I think absolutely. Not as many people are going into it, but it's sickening to deal with. It's a floodgate-like thing that happens and is just splashed into certain top decks even. I feel like this should be dealt with and done away with. I don't feel like this is healthy for the game. I think it should still be on a radar, and while Buster Blader's a fan favorite, this is really sick and needs to be dealt with in the game. Hit Union Carrier? I don't think so. This is one of the only problems. The rest of Union Carrier's interactions in the game so far are pretty interesting, rather than like, oh my god, this is ruining the game. Nah, I think you deal with the problem card with it, and while it does also have something to do with future card creation and how it can interact from being sent from the field or whatever with Union Carrier, most of its interactions I find a lot more interesting rather than toxic to the game. Did I talk dinos yet? Yep, we talked about miscellaneous source. I don't think anything else really needs to get choked out or hit. Anyways, thanks for watching this Banlist Talk video. Not a Banlist channel, only like 1/3 of the year. Anyways, please subscribe if you haven't already. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed the conversation. Use that TCG player link in the description down below, costing you nothing extra to support the channel directly for your 500 IQ plays on Banlist investing. And we'll see what happens with the Banlist itself very soon.